Alright, me darlings, and it's that time of year again, the time when the leaves start to go brown, the autumn chill returns, and the spectres and ghosts are all around us. And for me, that means looking at stuff that wasn't supposed to be scary, but ended up being anyway. It's been a while since I've done one of these. In 2020 I did a video on Roald Dahl movies to coincide with the release of The Witches that same month, and last year I didn't do any videos at all. So, it's time for the long-awaited return to Unintentionally Scary.
And what will it be this year? Movies? TV shows? Advertisements?
Well, how about this year, we do all of them at once. This is essentially just going to be me doing a catch-up on things that I haven't yet covered, so might as well do them all in one video. So, with that, let's get straight into it, with even more unintentionally scary things.
And so, in the words of another great fox,
Chaos reigns.
First up, we're going to look at movies, and while I have said in the past that I don't think movies are worth covering because I've covered most of them in individual reviews, there are a few that are worth mentioning that don't really have enough to do for a full review. There were plenty of movies that scared me as a kid, like Gremlins, Coraline, and Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, but all of those movies were intended to be scary. What we are looking at here are things that weren't supposed to be scary, but ended up being scary. And what a better example would there be of that in the movie world than Dark Crystal.
I will rip out your throat and beat you to death with the tonsil end!
Okay, calm down, I was just joking. What I really meant was cats. This is a surprisingly more recent kind of product that I would normally talk about, but it can't be ignored on this list. My God, the CGI in this movie is really creepy. Granted, CGI has always been a little bit creepy in some way. I mean, just have a look at some of Pixar's early shorts. And you thought the scenes in Sid's house in Toy Story were scary. But this is supposed to be modern, top-of-the-range CGI, and they couldn't stop it from looking even creepier than that. Cats is a weird play to adapt anyway, especially because in terms of an actual narrative, it's very loose, particularly since it was based off a book of poems by T.S. Eliot. So trying to make a coherent story out of that is next to impossible, but that's the least of this movie's problems. Unless you're deliberately going to make it seem kitschy and low budget, adapting those odd costumes from the play is going to be very difficult, and an incredibly demanding challenge for even the best film directors. Despite that though, the people that made this movie plowed on ahead and didn't really care about it. This movie went through so many different design styles and special effects companies before eventually ending on this finished product. And unfortunately, it wasn't worth it because, well, look at this shit. This is some of the most uncanny valley stuff I've ever seen.
This probably doesn't help your whole I hate cats thing, does it?
I don't know why you're defending them. Surely you're constantly fighting with cats over food from the bins. It's made all the worse that they've got a pretty high prestige cast for the movie. Now granted, this movie would have looked creepy regardless of who they got to play the characters, but if they were played by more unknown actors, it would have lessened the creepiness a little bit. But seeing the faces of people we recognized attached to these hideous creatures, it just makes it seem all the worse. It's like some weird Thomas the Tank Engine style thing where they took the faces of celebrities and ripped them off of their head and then stuck them onto these weird cats. Though to be fair, with some of the cast involved, I wouldn't mind seeing their faces get ripped off.
Right, well that's not going to work, is it?
Oh, and if you thought the cats were creepy, take a look at these cockroaches. And I thought the scene at the end of The Fly was creepy. But watching this, I'll be the one screaming, "Help me!" This movie was such an instant joke that the company who did the effects for it, who also did the effects for the finished version of the Sonic movie, which if they went with his first design, that movie would have likely have been on here too, ended up going out of business. Though, let's be fair, there wasn't really anything of value lost there at all. What are they going to do next? An adaptation of Joseph in his Technicolor Dreamcoat, with hopefully a less risque version of Potiphar's wife in there. How the hell did they let that slide back then? I could practically see her nipples. But that's Joan Collins for you. But anyway, let's get into some TV shows now. And so we come to probably what is the most requested thing for me to talk about on my unintentionally scary videos, the gabbling pink penis himself, Mr. Blobby.
AKA your long-lost twin.
You what?
Well, he's tall, he's bald, and he's got creepy eyes just like you.
Oh, shut up. Now, there are probably some people here who are too young to even remember Mr. Blobby, or come from an area where they just don't know about him. So, in a quick history, the bearded android known as Noel Edmonds was famous for hosting a bunch of kids shows from the 70s to the 90s, his most famous of which being Noel's House Party, which was renowned for having this thing.
Blob, blob. Behave! Behave! Go to your room!
That being Mr. Blobby, a character who looks like a clown's novelty condom come to life. One that looks like it has already been used a few times at that. Despite him looking like every child's worst nightmare come to life, with a permanently fixed creepy grin that leads to a void of nothingness, his bizarrely spring-loaded bug eyes, and the fact that he moves and talks like he's having both a seizure and on cocaine at the same time, he became insanely popular, getting his own spin-off shows, appearing in numerous other TV shows, and even commercials, and is still popular to this day. One thing I will say about him that is kinda cool, up until the year 2015, he was portrayed by Barry Killerby, who also played the Purple Pimple in Chucklevision, which I have to admit is actually kind of cool because he had a lot of class in those episodes, and to know that he also plays Mr. Blobby, it's actually rather impressive that he has that amount of versatility.
What kind indeed, citizen?
A shame though he couldn't make Mr. Blobby as cool as the Purple Pimple was.
Blobby looks more like the pink genital wart.
Yeah, nowhere near as cool. Admittedly, a lot of it comes down to him being so creepy as a combination of his really weird facial design. Seriously, the mouth is bad enough, but whose idea was it to give him eyes that are on springs? And the fact that he acts so erratically and hyperactive all the time. This is the thing that's common amongst a lot of kid characters, especially ones that are in costumes, where the people who perform them try way too hard to entertain, and it just comes off as scary more than entertaining. I can appreciate them going all the way with this, but considering that Dick and Dom have proved time and time again that you can be entertaining and hilarious when you have a sense of self-awareness and cynicism to you, it's really not needed.
You okay with getting splattered? Oh no, he's a nutter.
While Blobby does continue to appear in shows to this day, thankfully most people have come to the realization, oh yeah, this guy's terrifying. Maybe one day Russell Howard's prediction of what will happen to him will come true.
Where do you reckon Blobby is now? But he's
Probably frozen somewhere.
I bet he's on crack in Morecambe.
Now wouldn't that be a sitcom waiting to happen? A crack den that's full of a bunch of forgotten children's characters. Otis the Aardvark, Roland the Rat, Gordon the Gopher.
Okay, let's move on to the next one now because this is making me hungry.
So I mentioned this in one of my previous videos that CITV were always trying to come up with their own version of Teletubbies to compete with the BBC. We saw the result of that with the Boom Bars, but that wasn't their first attempt, as we'll see with the TV show they did in the 90s called Teddy Bears.
Not the most imaginative name, is it?
And neither were the costumes they used. Just take a look.
I'm Sarah.
Charles!
Robert. Louise.
William!
It was an interesting creative decision to make these guys look even scarier than the horror movie version of Winnie the Pooh, and have the same mask design as the Look and Read News Hound.
News hound sniffing around. News hound.
Oh yeah, you can add that guy to this year's list as well. Admittedly, the reason why some costumes in TV shows are made like this is because full-bodied suits are notoriously hard to wear, especially when it comes to the release of body heat and being able to see out of them. So having this gap around the eyes allows the wearer to see a lot easier, and also have an area for the body heat to escape. Unfortunately, seeing them will cause your soul to escape your body. Looking at these guys just makes me think, wow, this is what it would have looked like if the Cheshire Cat and Thing 1 and Thing 2 from the Cat in the Hat movie had a baby. Too bad these guys don't disappear as well.
You've just given me the worst mental image ever.
Eh?
The idea of those two characters having sex.
I think that's still a better image to haunt your dreams than this is.
I'm gonna have mine with strawberries and lots of nuts.
Okay, I agree, it is.
And granted, CITV are no strangers to these videos of mine, and they've done some other creepy puppet stuff like Rosie and Jim or Roger and the Rotten Trolls. Hell, the phone from Wizardora alone could probably qualify itself to be on this list.
He turned my ringer off and put me outside.
How about you use yourself to call the phone repair line, so they can take you away and replace you with Alexa? At least she's only got a creepy voice. But this takes the cake by far. And it's a shame too, because ITV have been giving us sooty shows for several decades, and regardless of whether or not they were entertaining, the puppets in them were always cute and endearing, and they were just £2 worth of felt and some buttons sewn on, for crying out loud. Although, Sooty's been no stranger to going to more darker sides of media too, as evidenced when he hung out with Bobby Davro.
Hello, Sue. How am I operating, Sue?
Still not as smutty as Peepadoo, though.
Is that show gonna be on this list too?
I don't think so. That's not only not made for kids, but it's not really that scary either. Well, apart from the Germans episode. Speaking of rip-offs, there was another big kids show that got copied a lot in the 90s and 2000s, and that was Thomas the Tank Engine. And when you're copying something that's already a little creepy, naturally any cheap knockoffs are going to be even creepier, like Chuggington or Budgie the Helicopter, but one certainly takes the biscuit, and that is JJ the Jet Plane. Well, I think we all see what's wrong here. He's far too small to be a jet plane. He's a private plane at the most. Oh, and there's the little fact that his face looks like Dara Breen achieving orgasm plastered to the front of it. I think this video has been a showcase of a vital rule when it comes to kids show characters. Make sure their face isn't creepy. Oh, and what's worse than having a face like that? No offense, Dara. Having the voice of a child.
What would you ask for? What would I ask for? Yeah. I know. Faster jet fuel. Faster jet fuel. Exactly.
Also, this show, I guess, took some inspiration from Shining Time Station because there's a bunch of real people green screened into the show. All of whom look like they're praying they don't go through their own Shed 17 experience and have their faces ripped off and stuck onto a new plane. The worst thing about it, though, isn't just how awful the faces look, but how said faces and the area around them are the only parts on the plane that move like they're actually alive. Say what you will about Thomas, but the fact that only the eyes move and that they were puppets, not CG, somehow it made them feel a little less creepy. They were still a bit creepy, but nothing like this. The way that their faces flail around so wildly but their bodies stay rigid, it makes it look like there's an actual person stuck in those plane shells and they're trying to wiggle their way out.
Maybe that's what they're trying to do. I mean, if you were stuck inside an unmoving animated image, you'd probably be fighting to get out too, right?
Yeah. Let's just move on then. Admittedly, the creepiness and uncanny valley effect probably comes from how each part of the show's animation was done by different processes, which, to be fair, a lot of animated shows and movies do that, but when the plane bodies are animated using real toy planes for references, and the faces are done with face capture technology, which, no, that doesn't mean they captured people's faces from off of their head and stuck them onto the planes, although that is what it looks like, it creates a really creepy disconnect and it just looks off. That and the CGI is just awful. As I've said before, TV CGI didn't really start to look good until around about the 2010s. Unfortunately, it seems that creepy puppets were still a thing by that point. So here's a channel that also had a reputation for making slightly creepy shows, Nickelodeon. From the Klasky Supo cartoons to Jimmy Neutron to shows with some severe behind the scenes issues, Nickelodeon have always hopped back and forth from the line that separates charmingly offbeat and childhood scarringly disturbing. But I think I might have found their crowning achievement of the latter, and it's using an animation format that they've not really done before, or since for that matter, which given the result of this show, that's probably not much of a surprise. Puppetry, with this bizarre experiment in disgusting Mr. Meaty.
I'm Buddy the Cow and I'm here to say to wish you a very happy birthday. My horn's full of magic and my udder's full of dreams. My tail there for pulling, so let me hear you scream.
I take back my half-joking comment on Dark Crystal. This is probably the creepiest puppetry I've ever seen, besides Meet the Feebles.
I take it that's also not in this year's video, because it's also not made for kids?
Exactly. Although, if I did include it, it'd be the ultimate of all things I've ever talked about in these videos. Now granted, I will concede that puppets are hard to do right in media, but when your main character looks like an Aardman character on crack, and the other looks like Cubert from Futurama on meth, a lot of drug analogies I'm being able to pull from this one, aren't I? It's something that should have never have graced the screen in the first place, in any form, but in felt and plastic rod form, yeah, that's by far the worst way they could have done this. This sort of Beavis and Butthead style humour is something that doesn't lend itself to the real world, since often with that kind of humour you make things look deliberately ugly, and if you do it in puppet form, you really have to be an expert in visual comedy and puppet making to pull that off. Yeah, these guys clearly aren't that. And that's not even getting into the other puppets, who look like a condom with a face painted on it and a wig slapped on. Although, to be fair, I'd probably love to see an actual puppet show that was just like that. Oh yeah, I guess they already have. And the jokes and stories don't really help the tone either, which is just the ultimate brainless teen comedy garbage. But unlike Beavis and Butthead, it doesn't even have a clever undertone to it.
It's delicious.
Fortunately, Nickelodeon have never really ventured back into puppetry, and to be fair, with how badly things have been going for them in the last few years, they probably won't ever again. And if this is the stuff they've been making, I say thank God.
I think stuff like this is proof that God is dead, George.
Maybe so, Huck. Maybe so. And so now, we move on to ads, and, well, let's just say that ads are still an assault on the senses in a 30-second package, but what we've got up next are an assault on your sanity. On yours, that is. I lost mine a long time ago. So, with ads, it's a bit tricky to find the best ones for this video, since some can be a bit off-putting, but don't really have enough to talk about in them. Like this Trebor Mr. Soft ad.
Mr. Soft, won't you tell me why the world in which you're living is so strange?
Yeah, it's a tad creepy, but what is there to say about it? Other than it looks like the Michelin Man's gone on a diet. So, let's go with a classic, as some people call it, to start off with. The Reebok belly ad. Which, well, speaking as a guy who has a bit of a belly, I can say this is probably a good way of motivating me to get in shape. Being chased down the street by a giant gut, which I have to say they did everything they could to make it look as gross as possible, it's certainly a motivator to get you running, mostly because it'll eat you if you don't.
But how can it eat him if it doesn't have a mouth?
No, but somehow it burps. Let's just hope this doesn't turn into that scene from Caligula. The intense music doesn't really help with the scary tone either, and, well, just when you think you've seen everything, here's a disembodied belly riding a motorcycle. Still looks just as attractive as anybody else you'd find in a biker bar. Oh, and the ad ends with the belly being flung into the water.
Now that's what I'd call a belly flop.
Boo. This is an ad that would never be on TV today, not just because of the scariness, but because it's technically fat shaming, and no one would get away with that these days. We've already got perfume and aftershave ads to make guys like myself feel ashamed of ourselves. We don't need the subtext to be this obvious. Marmite did do a similar ad with a giant blob of Marmite rampaging down the street and having a woman who loves it so much she dives into it. Which, even though I love Marmite too, even I wouldn't do that. Do you know how hard it is to clean that stuff out of your hair?
How do you know that?
I dated a girl who was into some weird stuff once, and on that note, never use toothpaste as lube.
Ouch.
So here's a company I didn't think I'd talk about on this video. Coke. Coke tends to have a pretty good marketing strategy for themselves and do some pretty good ads. They do some odd stuff every once in a while, but in general, some of the most iconic ads of all time have been theirs. And while I'm tempted to mention the creepy Thunderbirds knockoff ads for Diet Coke, I think I've found something even worse than that for Coke Zero. That being these ads.
Why are you guys drinking Coke Zero?
We're not. We're drinking Coke, mate.
Well, it says Coke Zero on the bottle.
Well, they must have messed up and put Coke in the wrong bottle.
Whatever.
Is this an ad for Coke or a missing scene from Bride of Reanimator?
Also, how can they drink the Coke? They can't suck it out without lungs.
Of all the things to comment on, that's what you start with.
Yes, I strive for factual accuracy in media,
says the cartoon fox. It's bad enough with seeing these messed up things talking to each other, but why in God's name did they give the eyeball chicken legs and the tongues elephant feet? Are we sure Brian Yuzna didn't direct these ads? I mean, the acting's just as awkward as the ones in his films anyway. Also, the brain with a mouth, somehow that's even creepier. Though I will admit, it does have a sexy voice.
I can read. You're giving me a headache. If you two can't get along, I'm going to make you eat dirt. And you'll have to wear the onion sombrero.
Do you think he gives good head?
Boo.
Also, what's with the different accents? These ads were made in America. Why is the eyeball French and the tongues British? Why stop there? Why not have the nose be German or the ears be Spanish?
And the arsehole having the voice of you.
And you could be the voice of a dick.
This is reminding me of Peepadoo again.
Now here's an ad campaign I knew I'd get to eventually. Halifax Howard. Howard Brown was the spokesperson for Halifax banks in the 2000s and was insanely popular, to the point where you could consider him the equivalent of what the meerkats are these days. It's kind of sad to think, though, that two of the most popular ads we Brits have done for the last century are for a bank and an insurance company. His ads started off rather simple, but as it got more popular, they got way more elaborate and over the top. And he even cut his own single, and I'll admit, they were actually rather fun, even if they didn't convince me to actually join Halifax. Though, evidently, his career didn't really flourish from these ads, as the last time he was on TV in the last 10 years was on First Dates. But near the end of the 2000s, he started to lose steam, so they decided to have some new life added to his ads by making them animated, which does sound like a good idea, until you see the way they did it.
A little bird told me that Halifax now pay 3% credit interest on their current account. Howard, that's 30 times more than these banks. 30 times?
I think I'm missing JJ the jet plane right now. I can sympathise for these agencies trying to make ads for banks. It's tough, since, well, how are you supposed to think of new and interesting ways of saying, we won't gamble your money away while we're drunk? But still, who came up with this? Making the most beloved spokesperson of the time look like a possessed bobblehead. Also, with how insane and weirdly fast-paced the ads are, it makes me think I'm watching my last fever dream animated onto TV. That coupled with the poor lip syncing, the dodgy looking textures, and the fact that everything in the ad looks so cartoony, and yet Howard's face looks so realistic, it gives yet another weird uncanny valley effect, especially with those teeth. I'm getting Sonic movie trailer flashbacks from those. And the scariest thing of all, being reminded of the song Who Let the Dogs Out.
Howard say, this can only mean one thing.
Who gives you extra? We do.
I was doing perfectly fine in my life before remembering that song even existed.
Me too. Brings back some bad memories from when I used to live in the woods near a stately home.
I bet you were saying who let the dogs out every Sunday round there. Evidently, Halifax themselves knew this was a bad idea, and so these were the last Harold ads they ever made. And their next ad campaign would involve old Hanna-Barbera characters, which I have no idea how they got them. Maybe Joe Hanna was having some money issues and the bank agreed to make it go away if they could use his characters. But since this was the path they were going down with the Howard ads, that was probably for the best. This was just pure horror. But now, let's get into a shop that going into also feels like pure horror. Yep, the Chav's choice for Christmas presents, Argos, and their rather popular series of ads involving blue aliens. I hope this is the last time I have to deal with creepy puppets today. I've had enough of them myself. These were the ads that Argos ran for a few years in the early 2010s, and they were popular enough to get their own toys. I would say that was impressive, but after the Meerkats did their toy line, it wasn't a big deal anymore. Every ad was trying to make toys of them. Even this ad.
Stop, grab your spoon and listen. It's hunger grabbing your attention.
But with these things, I wouldn't want to go anywhere near the toys because of one, or rather two big reasons. Those eyes.
Just an Ollie Murs away from perfect.
Heard that!
I am so glad you said eyes just there.
Granted, their movement is very off-putting since they seem to be animated as marionettes, but they're the size of small humans, which is already creepy, but you can't see the strings, which makes them look really weird and just almost slightly ghost-like. But those giant, glassy, dead eyes that just stare into your soul, those are terrifying. I'm not even sure what the point of these ads are supposed to be. They're aliens living on Earth, so make themselves more integrated by shopping at Argos. If you want to blend in, go work in Argos. Most of their staff looks like they came from another planet anyway. Also, those tiny little mouths that also barely sync up with the audio, they remind me of the mouths from the aliens from Mac and Me, and at least that movie had this hilarious bit. All this is just Third Rock from the Sun, but not funny.
So, solar opposites then?
Yeah, pretty much. Let's get on to our next bit. And let's end off today's ad with one that has stuck with me for a very long time. Imagine watching TV on a Saturday morning. The ads come up, you see ads for toys, theme parks and kids movies, and then all of a sudden, the most horrifying thing you can imagine comes on the TV. Chicago.
If you leave me now, you'll take away the biggest part of me.
No! It's too awful! Aren't there standards of broadcast laws against this?
Oh yeah, and it's being sung by a talking cherry, as you can see. This is a time when ads, particularly British and mobile ads, were getting really, really weird. But even by those standards, who came up with this idea? Let's have two girls running around a really nice set actually, and then one sees a singing cherry and that somehow equals promotion for our mobile service. This ad honestly feels like the director just went on holiday and then remembered he had to make an ad and hand it in the next day, so he threw this together. It also doesn't help that the image of the cherry singing from its stem looks really unpleasant. Almost feels like I should be censoring it. Granted, having the cherry have a whole face wouldn't have worked much better, especially with these effects, but still, it would have been less creepy. Also, that cherry was sitting on cream, but when the girl picks it up, there was no cream. Did the cherry eat it? Can the cherry eat? I mean, it can breathe and sing, so it can probably eat. That girl just ate a living thing that can sing and breathe and eat. She's a monster. That cherry could have gone on to form its own band. It could have become an idol. It could have run for president. You're a murderer, a psycho, a terrible person. Why would you do that? Why?
I think we need to start wrapping this video up now. You're starting to lose it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And besides, this is still not the freakiest mobile ad I've ever seen. That honour goes to...
Plus de data, plus de stories, plus de... Forfait énergie mobile 100 Go à 9,99€ par mois pendant...
Is there anything we can say about this?
I don't think there is. Other than this has taught me to never go to France anytime soon. So, let's just leave it at that. Besides, we've got a party to get ready for tonight. come on, Huck. We've got to get going in a minute. What costume have you got on for this year, Rennie? Well, that might be the most frightening thing I have ever seen.
Happy Halloween!
Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Happy, happy Halloween, Silver Shamrock. Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Happy, happy Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
It's almost time, kids.